For lesson 4.5, we're talking about compound inequalities. And a compound inequality is when we have more than one part to our answer or our problem. And in the case of these compound inequalities, we can have two different types, an and problem or an or problem. An and problem, it must be both. So it's going to have two different pieces and both must be true in an and problem. This one and that one have to be true. For an or problem, only one is true. So it's going to have two different pieces where it can be this or it can be that, but it can't be both. So this one we have to make sure we understand that it is not both. For the or problem, it is not both. Alright, and then that'll make more sense if we look at some examples here. We're going to solve and graph again. So these problems looks a lot harder than it is. When you look at a problem like this, I would suggest ignoring, like pretend this piece isn't even here. If I just had a problem like this, I would solve this by dividing both sides by -3. That's just like when we solve a one-step inequality. That would cancel out and leave x. Because I divided by a negative, we've got to flip that sign around, so it becomes this way. And 3 divided by -3 is -1. So if we look at that, that's nothing new. But what's going to change is now this other side does exist. We can't just ignore it. So when I divided by -3, instead of just doing it once on the left and once on the right, we don't just have a left and right, we have a left, a right, and a middle. So whatever we do in a problem like this, we do 3 times, once in the middle, and then on the left, and on the right. So we already did the middle on the left, so I'm going to divide the right side by -3, because that's the same thing I did on the other parts. And again, I divide by negative, so this sign flips around also. And then 6 divided by -3 is -2. And then I'm going to put my number line. I'll start with -1, -2. Let's change that. Let's move this down so it's not in the way here. -1, -2, and so on. Okay. It doesn't really matter where you put your numbers on the number line as long as both of your numbers, in our case we need the -1 and the -2 to be included. And then it has an equal to part at the -1, so we're going to fill in at the -1, fill in circle at the -1. And it is going to be shaded. Okay, let's look at this separately. Let's look at the -2 first. Filled in circle also at the -2. So I'll fill that in. Okay. Now if I look at just this side here, it's easier to read. X values that are greater than. So that's going to be this direction. Greater than -2 or to the right of -2. For the -1 side, I'm going to write that over here. We have -1 is greater than or equal to x. We can either read it backwards or we can rewrite it. I can rewrite it like this. X is less than or equal to -1. The open side faces -1. The open side is still facing the -1. The pointy side is facing the x. The pointy side is still facing the x. So those are equivalent. It's just easier to read in this form. So x values that are less than -1 are going to go this direction. So we notice that they are going to go towards each other. But this one can't go past the -2 because this other rule said, well, it has to be greater than -2. So it has to be greater than -2. It has to be greater than -2, but it has to also be at the same time less than -1. So it's going to be everything in between these two numbers. So it has to fit both rules. That's what we're talking about in our vocabulary, how we said it had to be both. It has to be both of those at the same time. It has to be greater than -2, and at the same time it has to stay less than -1. So we shade everything in the middle of those two numbers. Let's try another one. So again, if we ignore one of these sides, I would say, how do I solve this one? I would add 3. So I'm going to add 3, but I would have to add 3 in the middle, and on the left, and on the right. So we do it 3 times. 3 plus 3 is 6, is less than x is less than or equal to 8. So then I want to get my 6, 7, 8, wherever you want to put them, as long as we have both the 6 and 8 on the number line. Alright, and then the 8 side has the equal to part. So the 8 side we do want to fill in. And x values that are less than 8. So that's going to go towards the left. On the other end, the 6 does not have equal to, so we have an open circle at the 6. And I'm going to read this backwards. Oh, here, I'll write it first and then we'll read it backwards. X is greater than 6. So the open side still faces the x. That is the same thing as what we originally had. It was originally 6 less than x. So if we read it backwards, x, then if we're reading it this direction, we get to the open side first, so x is bigger than 6, which is easier to see in this one here. X is greater than or bigger than 6. So greater than 6 means I'm going to the right. So it has to be bigger than 6. But it has to stay less than 8. So it's going to be everything in between 6 and 8. It has to fit both those at the same time. It has to be bigger than 6, but it has to be less than 8 at the same time. Number 3, we're doing same thing, but we've got a 2-step. So I would undo the adding 1 first. We do minus 1. What I do to the middle, I do to the left and to the right. It's negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. Is less than negative 2x is less than or equal to 6. And then I look at my middle. I'm always looking at the middle to see what am I going to do. I need to isolate that x. So I need to get rid of that times by negative 2. So I divide by negative 2. And then because I am dividing by a negative, those signs are going to switch. Negative 3 divided by negative 2 is positive 1.5, or you can leave it as 3 over 2. We're going to flip that sign around because we divided by a negative. We're left with x in the middle. Again, flip the other sign around because we divided by a negative. 6 divided by negative 2 is negative 3. I'm just going to go ahead and put these two numbers on here. But when I do this, I want to be careful because negative 3 is smaller than 1.5. So I want to make sure I put this on my number line in an appropriate place. So negative 3 would be on this side, whereas 1.5 would be somewhere up over this way. Negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2. So 1.5 would be right around here, 1.5. And then I want at the 3 side, the negative 3 side, I need to fill in circle. But on the 1.5 side, I want an open circle. And I need x values to be greater than or equal to the negative 3, so that's this direction. And I need x values to be less than or equal to the 1.5, that's this direction. So it's going to be everything in between here. And if we solve it correctly, an and will always be shaded in the middle. So that could be a note that we write off to the side. Shaded in the middle. So if you're ever solving an and problem and you get an answer where you're not shading in the middle, that tells me that we made a mistake somewhere. Alright, so we got one more and problem, and then we'll switch over to the or. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. I'm sorry, not both sides, all sides. I have to do it 3 times now because I have 3 separate parts here. So it's going to be negative 12 less than or equal to 3x less than or equal to 6. Divide everything by 3. So I get negative 4 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 2. Not flipping the sign because I didn't multiply or divide by negative. I need a negative 4, negative 3, negative 2. And then I need filled in circle, and filled in circle on both of them. So filled in circle at negative 4, filled in circle at positive 2. And I need values for x that are less than 2, this way, and values for x that are greater than negative 4. So everything in the middle.